You're this family's biggest shame." That was the last thing my father said to me before slamming the heavy oak door in my face. Outside, the rain was pouring, but inside my chest, a cold, sharp anger was settling in. 2 weeks later, I stood in a polished auditorium, surrounded by generals, high-ranking military officials, and press cameras. On the velvet pillow before me sat the Silver Star, one of the highest military decorations for valor in combat. Every honoree had their family in the front row, crying and holding hands. Mine was completely empty. My dad had refused to attend. He thought he had publicly humiliated me. He thought he had broken my spirit. What he didn't realize was that the local news was broadcasting the ceremony live, and the official citation read by the general was about to expose the multi-million-dollar lie my family had been hiding for over a decade. My name is Maya Vance. I'm 28 years old, a staff sergeant in the United States Army, and according to my father, the absolute biggest disappointment to ever carry the Vance last name. Growing up, my home wasn't a family, it was a corporate hierarchy. My father, a ruthless real estate mogul, treated every dinner table conversation like a quarterly performance review. My older brother, Julian, was the golden child who followed every rule, went to an Ivy League school, and stepped right into a plush vice president suite at Vance Enterprises. I, on the other hand, chose a combat uniform over a tailored suit. The day I enlisted, my father refused to shake my hand. He called it an act of teenage rebellion that I'd regret for the rest of my life. 3 weeks ago, I drove over to his gated mansion, holding a crisp white envelope in my hand. Inside was an official invitation to my upcoming Silver Star ceremony. I thought, maybe, just maybe, saving lives in an active war zone would finally earn an ounce of his respect. I handed him the envelope across his polished marble island. He didn't even open it. He glanced at the official military seal, tossed it onto the counter like a piece of junk mail, and let out a cold, sharp laugh. "A medal," he sneered, crossing his arms. "You want me to take a day off work to watch you get a shiny piece of metal for playing soldier? While your brother is closing a $20 million buyout, you're boasting about a paltry Army award." He stepped closer, his eyes ice cold. "You threw away your talent, Maya. You chose dirt and gunfire over a real career. Don't ever come back into this house until you've actually accomplished something worth showing off. You are this family's biggest shame." I didn't scream. I didn't push back, and I certainly didn't let him see a single tear fall. For 28 years, I had watched my father use anger to manipulate everyone around him. But years of military service had taught me one fundamental truth. True strength isn't loud. It's quiet, disciplined, and unwavering. So, I simply looked him in the eye, left the crisp white invitation sitting on the marble counter, turned on my heel, and walked out. The heavy oak door slammed behind me, ringing through the humid evening air. As I drove away from the estate, my knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but my breathing remained perfectly steady. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to beg for his validation. I wasn't going to give it to him. The day of the ceremony arrived 2 weeks later. Standing in front of the mirror in my dress uniform, I smoothed down the dark green fabric and adjusted the sharp ribbons pinned to my chest. My phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a mass family group text. My father had posted a gleaming picture of Julian standing alongside a board of directors, celebrating his latest corporate promotion. The comments from our relatives rained down with praise. "So proud of you, Julian," and "a true Vance carrying on the legacy." Not a single person mentioned my ceremony. An hour later, I stepped into the grand, high-ceilinged auditorium at the base. The room was humming with energy, officials in polished uniforms, press photographers adjusting their lenses, and families filling the rows, holding hands and wiping away tears of pride. I walked down the center aisle toward the front row. There, right in the center, was a velvet-backed chair with a reserved card that read, "Guest of Staff Sergeant Vance." It sat completely, undeniably empty. I sat down next to it, folded my hands in my lap, and stared straight ahead at the stage. My father thought his absence was a punishment. He thought he was leaving me stranded in the dark. He had no idea that the spotlight was about to turn directly on him. Across town, inside the gated walls of his estate, My father was hosting an afternoon cocktail hour. He had invited 5 of his wealthiest business partners to celebrate Julian's newest corporate deal. In the corner of his high-end lounge, a massive 80-inch television was tuned to the local news station. My dad hadn't turned it on to support me. He had left it playing on mute purely so he could gesture at it, roll his eyes, and complain to his guests about his wayward daughter, who insisted on making a spectacle out of her military career. He was in the middle of pouring a glass of expensive scotch, chuckling with a client about the foolishness of public service, when the broadcast abruptly shifted. The news anchor cut to a live feed of the auditorium. The headline across the bottom of the screen flashed in bold red letters, "Live. Silver Star Ceremony for Local Hero." One of the executives pointed at the screen. "Is that your daughter, Vance?" My father scoffed, grabbing the remote to unmute the volume, preparing to deliver another biting remark. But before he could speak, the commanding general stepped up to the podium, his voice echoing clearly through the speaker system. "Staff Sergeant Maya Vance," the general announced, his expression stoic and solemn, "for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action. When her platoon was ambushed in an hostile zone, Sergeant Vance took command under heavy fire, risking her own life to extract 6 wounded soldiers." The room in the mansion fell dead silent. My father froze, the glass of scotch hovering midair. However, the general's voice darkened as he continued reading the official citation. This heroic action was made necessary due to a catastrophic failure of critical transport equipment that was deliberately supplied with fraudulent, substandard armor plates by a domestic contractor. The general's voice boomed through the television speakers, striking my father's living room like a lightning bolt. He didn't just stop at praising my bravery. He laid out the cold, horrifying facts of what had actually happened on that dusty road thousands of miles away. During our patrol, our armored transport had been hit. It was an explosion we should have survived with minor bruises. But the protective steel plating on the side of our vehicle crumpled like aluminum foil. 2 of my squad mates were trapped in the wreckage, bleeding out while shrapnel cut through substandard metal that was supposed to save our lives. I had dragged them out under relentless enemy fire, using my own body as a shield, terrified that every breath would be our last. What my father didn't know as he sat in his air-conditioned mansion was that I hadn't just survived that day, I had investigated it. While recovering in the military hospital, I couldn't stop thinking about why that armor had failed so completely. I took photos of the sheared bolts, recorded the batch numbers stamped into the rusted frame, and passed the evidence directly to the Army Criminal Investigation Division. The investigation went deep. Federal agents followed the paper trail through a web of shell companies, fake inspection reports, and offshore bank accounts. And every single line of money led back to one place: Apex Logistics, a defense contracting firm secretly owned by Vance Enterprises and managed directly by my golden child brother, Julian. My father and brother had cut corners on military contracts to pad their own profit margins by millions. They bought cheap, defective steel, forged safety certifications, and pocketed the difference. They had grown rich by selling death traps to the very soldiers they claimed to look down upon. I was the black sheep who had ruined their perfect scam, simply by refusing to die in the metal box they built. Back in the mansion, the air turned entirely to ice. My father stood paralyzed, his eyes wide as the general on screen explicitly detailed the federal indictment. The 4 wealthy clients in his lounge stared at him in utter horror, slowly setting their drinks down on the marble tables before silently heading for the exit. My father didn't even try to stop them. His hands were shaking so violently that scotch sloshed over the rim of his crystal glass. Right as the television cut to a commercial break, a breaking news banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. "Live. Federal agents raid Vance Enterprises." The broadcast shifted live to the glass-fronted corporate headquarters downtown. Camera crews were already on the scene, capturing the chaotic moment. FBI agents and military investigators swept through the lobby. Through the clear glass doors, viewers across the nation watched as my brother, Julian, was let out in handcuffs. His tailored suit was wrinkled, his face pale with panic, and his head ducked down to avoid the flashing news cameras. The multi-million-dollar empire my father had spent 30 years building, The legacy he held over my head like a weapon was crumbling to dust in real time, broadcast live on national television. As the general placed the silver star around my neck in the auditorium, thunderous applause echoed through the hall. Millions of people were cheering for my bravery, while simultaneously watching the Vance family name be dragged through the mud. Deep in my uniform pocket, my phone began to buzz incessantly. It was my father, calling again and again, his world collapsing as he frantically sought a lifeline from the very daughter he had disowned. But I didn't reach for it. My phone remained silent in my pocket while I stood tall on that stage. 3 days later, I finally faced my father, not in his grand mansion, but across a scratched metal table inside a bleak federal holding facility. The man sitting across from me didn't look like the powerful mogul who had sneered at my military service. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by a drab jumpsuit. His hair was disheveled, and the sharp, arrogant edge in his eyes had been completely replaced by desperate panic. "How could you do this?" he rasped, his hands trembling against the cold steel table. "You destroyed your own family, Maya. Your brother is facing decades in federal prison. My company is gone. Our name is ruined. Is this your idea of revenge?" I placed a small, velvet-lined box gently on the metal surface between us. I opened the lid, letting the silver star catch the harsh fluorescent light above. "I didn't destroy this family," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and devoid of anger. "You and Julian destroyed it the moment you decided that profit was worth more than human lives. You called my service a shame, but you were the ones selling death traps to the young men and women fighting for this country." He swallowed hard, looking down at the metal, unable to meet my eyes. "You told me never to come back until I accomplished something worth showing off," I continued, standing up from the chair. "This medal represents honor, truth, and duty. Things you never taught me, but things I found anyway." I turned and walked out of that visitation room, leaving my father alone with his choices and the cold silence of his new reality. In the months that followed, the legal process moved swiftly. Vance Enterprises was liquidated to pay massive federal fines and restitution to the families affected by their corrupt military contracts. Both my father and Julian were sentenced to federal prison, their names permanently etched into public history as a caution against greed. I liquidated my tiny remaining share of the family trust, donating every single penny to a foundation that supports injured veterans and their families. I didn't want a single dime generated by their corruption. Today, I still wear the uniform with pride, now serving as an instructor training the next generation of leaders. The empty chair in that auditorium no longer haunts me. I realized that day that family isn't defined by blood or shared last names. It's built on honor, integrity, and standing up for what is right, even when the person you're standing up to is the one who raised you. My story isn't about revenge. It's about finding your own worth, walking away from toxic shadows, and stepping boldly into the light.